Well, Shilpa, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We're so excited to have you. You've had an incredible career, working 15 years as an executive at Google. You've done so many amazing things, and you've been able to build your personal wealth and your personal journey in a traditional 9-to-5 role, which a lot of our community members ask for. They want to see more women that have done something a little bit more traditional. I think a lot of times on social media, it can feel like you have to build a business to do well. And you've really shown that you can, work up the ranks and do well in other ways. So thank you so much for coming on. And
thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I'd love to start with your childhood. I think it really shapes the way that we view money. What was it like growing up? Were your parents very money savvy, and was that how it was passed down, or did you kind of learn a couple of things?
I think that growing up as a child, my parents were really good about integrating like the value of a dollar to us. And so I think part of the immigrant struggle, or being a second generation immigrant, is understanding what things used to cost back in the day. Because I think that parents often say, well, gas used to be like X number of cents, and now it's like $1 something. And I think now it's like $5, but always like showcasing like the value of a dollar and how inflation kind of impacts the economy and the structure. So I think because I understood the value of a dollar and had a concept of what inflation meant, I knew it was important to save, but also I knew it was important to understand like how to invest in a smarter way. But my investment would be like my piggy bank, right? Because I didn't have a bank account. So I was like, okay, well, I can, buy this ice cream today and this is how much it's going to cost, but I should probably save up if I want it like 5 months from now. And so I think we had this concept of like saving. And the one thing that my parents did when we traveled was they would give each one of us a role. So I think one of us would be, I have 2 older siblings. And so one sibling would be the tour guide and figuring out all the tickets and the tour spots. And then my middle sister was always currency exchange. And so how much money do we need in that day? And so she would ask my father for cash, and she would exchange the money, trying to figure out the best time or rate to exchange or place to exchange currency at. And then I was always the one that was more the research oriented one, either documenting things or being the video photo person. But I think even in those, we travel once a year. So even in those experiences, we were always witness to like, okay, what's a good day to exchange currency? What rate are we exchanging it at? So we had that value again of what a dollar meant and how to spend.
Oh my God, it sounds like your parents were amazing and so forward thinking to like,
I don't know. I don't know if it was a combination of like, how do we maximize like the amount of money, like, maximize our experience or optimize the experience by
outsourcing to the kids.
Outsourcing to the kids, but also like, it's also like, how do we be smart about it so that the dollar goes the longest way? And so it was, I don't know if it was like, I don't want to say it's kind of like the Gujarati Jewish way of like, really spend in a wise fashion.
For those that don't know what, the Gujarati stereotypes are around money, do you mind explaining that a little bit more?
Oh, yeah. So there's so many different, I guess, types of languages spoken in states and in India. And so my family is from the state of Gujarat. And that area, I guess, is known for being, I don't want to, I say it in the most polite way possible, but it's known for being really optimal with your money. And so people are always like, oh, you're being good Jew. And that usually means that you're being wise with your money. Maybe there's a sense of frugality in that, but it's really meant to be, usually they're not superfluous and spending extravagantly. It's usually they're being a little bit wiser and spending a little bit less and trying to still optimize the experience.
That is a really great way of describing it. I remember growing up, and I'm Punjabi, and we would hear this saying like, Punjabis will buy a car and a house as soon as they make money, and then maybe think about buying a business later, and Gujaratis will buy a business first, and then they'll buy the house and the nice car later. And it's not necessarily, not everyone fits into those stereotypes, but it's that idea of, you can be more focused on investing and saving and like have the rewards sort of later down the line. Were there any other ways that your parents instilled like good money values? Because we have a lot of parents that listen to the show and say like, my kid's only 5, but how do I get them to think about money?
Yeah. I think that, being in a family with 3 daughters, there's obviously the stereotype of like my dad felt this pressure to always be the one managing the finances. And I think, as we got older, we kept sharing with our mom, like, maybe you should understand what's happening. And I think as my mom started learning kind of all of the different strategies my dad had invested in, then I think we started learning with her. And so, I think had I had a brother, maybe the dynamic would have been different, just being in like in a South Asian family. So I think we really had to ask the questions to my dad to say, is this the CD that we're invested in? When can we pull out the money? We weren't earning money till we were in high school or on our own. I got my first job, I think, telemarketing. So like, that's the first time I actually had cash that I earned. So my dad was always giving us an allowance. And so I think the allowance that my dad and mom negotiated to give to us would always be, okay, at $20 a week, what was I going to spend it on? And if I didn't spend it, then that's my savings. And then I would incur that. And then if I had enough money, then I can buy like the toy that I wanted. And so they really tried to make it in a way that we were learning how to spend our money for things that we really needed or wanted, and not just getting things because we had access to things. Mm-hmm. So I think it was just like, I think the first thing is just getting everybody a piggy bank. No one uses change and quarters and like things, but like we used to use all those, like we used to obviously take all the change and put it in our piggy bank. Now I think people probably just use bills. So I don't know how piggy banks work now, but like,
well, sometimes there are like online cards that you can have, or like a MasterCard that's like for a child, and so you put money into the
so
card,
cool.
And the kid can like spend it, but also see on their app.
I love that.
So it's the same idea. Do you feel like there's a way in which, in general, South Asian parents raise their kids around money that's maybe different to the Indian diaspora, when we maybe have more of a Western approach to raising kids and money? Like, did you feel like there was much of a difference?
I think from my experience and not having kids, and so just kind of observing how my friends who have kids and my nieces and nephews, and kind of seeing how my sisters are raising their children, is, we didn't have, growing up, I didn't have a credit card. So I always had to have a wallet and a bill, an amount. And so I think the difference now is, I'm not sure if children these days understand how quickly money is being spent or transacted because they're using a digital platform, right? Mm-hmm. A card or an app, or just calling an Uber and not really understanding like, oh, that just cost $20, but it got billed to my father or billed to my mother. So I think that because of the physical exchange of a bill or cash, like I think we grew up a little bit, I would say, you could see the spend and you could physically feel the spend. So I'm curious, for this generation of children that are growing up with all of these digital apps and Venmo and Zelle, understanding the actual transfer of spend like the same way. I'm curious.
That is so true. I think there's been some science behind it, where if you buy things in cash, it hurts more because you see the cash go versus, the tap of Apple Pay.
Yeah. Like even myself now, like I find myself like not, because I do use credit cards a lot more than I use cash. Then, as a kid, I think we use cash because that's what our parents gave us as a $20 bill or a $10 bill. But now I use my credit card, and I only understand how much I spent on Ubers and how much I spend on certain things when I look at like my spending report and I see a pie graph and I was like, wow, I ate out a lot. Like I should start cooking a little bit more. Or I'm like, this is how much I spent on like, ride shares like Ubers and Lyfts. And I'm like, okay, maybe I need to like, navigate the subway better, or need to figure out another approach. And so
I also think in New York, as I've been visiting, Ubers are outrageous here. Nowhere else in the world have I been where it's like,
really?
Oh, you want to go like 10 minutes? That's $30.
You want to go 10 minutes? It's $30. Well, that's good. A good data point. So I guess that helps me like feel a little bit better about how much money I'm spending. So it is a little bit higher. I think the traffic is just horrible here. And I'm sure you read about the congestion tax that they're paying like to cross town. And so they were trying to make people pay money to cross town so that they could reduce like the number of cars, but I don't think it's changed much.
It's kind of like how in London, if you bring your car into London, you have that tax of like bringing your car into town, similar. And it seems to have worked a little bit. I want to sort of shift gears and talk about, how did you decide that you were going to go down the career path of having a 9-to-5 job versus, starting a business? did you feel any pressure to do one or the other? And did you kind of have a plan for what you wanted your future to look like as a kid?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think that you're often in I feel like I've been in autopilot for the last 20 years since I've been working. So I think that I often don't even I forget how I felt as a kid and what those dreams were. But, I think something that, I grew up in a family. My dad has his own business. My mom supported that business. She had a lot of creative passions, but I think I grew up in a way that I was kind of prone to thinking I would be working in some business capacity. So I wasn't the kid that wanted to be the doctor. I knew the doctor wasn't for me. I just didn't really, as cliche as I just did not like blood. So I knew that was not going to be my thing. I remember as a kid, I wanted to go into, my mom was in a lot of plays and things. And so I saw her on set and I saw her on stage and I was like, oh, I really want to be doing something creative. And so I wanted to go to school for journalism. I was like, I want to be a writer. I want to do these cool, I want to share stories with the world. And, being South Asian, I was applying to college and I was like, okay, I'm going to fulfill this dream of mine and go to journalism school and it's going to be great. And I had my application ready and my dad saw my application. He was like, okay, well, I want, I think you should be an engineer or go to business school. And I was like, well, I don't think I want to do that. I really want to go to journalism school. And I think he had me talk to maybe about 10 different parents, dads and moms, and families to convince me to consider doing a traditional degree. And
I can imagine him just doing the call up, talk to my kid. This is SOS emergency. I need them to do what I think is best for them.
Yeah. And it was, and I think he wasn't seeing, and obviously we see today, the monetization potential of these creative fields. But I think back in the day, they were so exposed to these traditional paths and these corporate paths. And it was so easy for they felt comfort in guiding us in that direction. And so I remember, having those conversations and, as simple as even I think I didn't even know what an engineer really did besides what I might have seen on TV or the news. And I think I pulled up the encyclopedia for E with my friends in my bedroom. And I was like, I read about an engineer and I was like, I think I can do this. I read it. And then I think, if I did that, my father and mother would have supported my education. So that's how I kind of fell into engineering. I went to school at University of Michigan. So go blue for those watching. And I did my undergrad and my master's in engineering. And then I still had that passion for creative and production. And so I worked at NBC Universal to kind of fill that void of how do I still be an engineer, but still be close to production? And I did that for a few years in LA and New York. And then And then somehow Google found me, who was my former employer. And I spent 15 years at Google working in monetizing video content and monetizing ads. So still try to find out a way to tie it back to some type of media outlet. And that's really been my path. And now I have the beauty of exploring, a new pivot in my career, which I'm really excited about because I think it really helps me kind of tap back into that inner child and figure out now for the next few decades, what's going to be the biggest opportunity to solve for the world, but also to kind of match the skill set and interests that I have.
It's really incredible. You've been able to find, financial freedom, and then that's also enabled you to then do what's important to you and your passion and have this sort of next stage of your life. Before we get there, I'd love to learn, what was your journey through Google? How did you work your way up the corporate ranks as someone that hasn't, really been through that corporate experience? And frankly, we don't see a lot of women of color that have gone so high up so quickly. What was your secret? What were your tips?
Oh my God, there's no secret, but that's really kind. Thank you. You're so generous. I think one of the things that I've always been intentional about is knowing or having a desire to work for as crazy as this is, and I'm going to go on a tangent, but it's everyone's been speaking a lot about the universe and manifestation and the power of manifestation and intention, and I didn't even know that was I think back in the day, I didn't even know that was a thing. I think when I was in college, I was like, I'd love to work at NBC Universal. Like, I like the shows they have. I think they, they obviously distributed Friends. And I was like, I just want to work at NBC. And I somehow worked at NBC. And then I think I was at NBC and I would randomly tell people, I'm like, if I'm not working for myself, I'm working for Google.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, if I'm not doing my own thing, I'm working for Google. And just randomly happened that I got an interview at Google. And so it almost was like, I didn't even know I was manifesting the next move, but I was saying it to the universe and it somehow was becoming a reality. And then when I got to Google, I, obviously just really enjoyed the work I was doing. And I think one of the things, again, was staying intentional of like, where is the impact I want to make in this role? And how do I want to be sure that I'm, we have these attributes, which is like, thought leadership used to be one of them, but like executional excellence, like how am I collaborating with others? What is the results that I'm driving? How am I helping the user have a better experience? And really focusing on like the intention of the company and making sure that in every role I took, I was meeting or exceeding the expectations I had set for myself and for the team. And I think being very clear in communicating those expectations and then being very diligent to make sure I'm measuring myself against those expectations, like we do it at a quarterly basis, really helped me build the story for myself, for my team, to help me progress into the next level, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. What do you think were the things, or what do you see as the things that people now kind of get wrong when it comes to growing up through that sort of corporate ladder?
Yeah, I think that
you smiled. I feel like you've got a few.
No. I think that there's so many different things because I think that there's people join companies at all different stages and experience and tenure. So I think speaking of somebody who maybe just came out of college or came out of school and it might be their first job, it's like what I think is important is understanding the level and the responsibility that you're in so that you can really perform at that level. So understanding the role, we say role profile. So understanding the responsibilities that your manager and you have come to terms with and really setting clear goals. I think one of the biggest challenges I see with at least folks that are maybe newer to the corporate world is when they don't set clear goals or objectives, then I think that they're more vulnerable to failure and more vulnerable to like maybe not getting promoted in an accelerated trajectory. And so I would say really setting those clear goals and objectives. And I think as you get more senior in your career, those objectives and those goals are going to not just be for you as an individual, they're going to be for the collective team. So making sure that you have a really deep understanding of what you're doing and what your team is doing and how that ties to the business impact and how it's business critical to the overall goal of the company. So the first thing I would say is clear objectives and goals, making sure that you're aligning with your manager and you're aligning with your team to make sure that there's impact and true impact there. The second thing is obviously execution. So making sure that you're delivering and you're pivoting those expectations as new information comes, right? Like things are constantly changing in the world. Systems are constantly changing. And so making sure that you're being flexible and you're checking in on those expectations so they are modifiable. And then the third thing is like making sure that people know your story. So I think you can be hardworking and work really well in silo, but if people don't see and if they're not invested in that journey, then you're less likely to get the exposure that you need so that a room of people are going to say, this person is ready for the next level. So I think the part that sometimes everyone has a different style of like, how do they showcase their work? And that's also a cultural thing. So I know that like in Asia, people are less likely to say, I did this, and they're going to say we, but it's really important that at least in American corporations, that the work that you did and that you drove is known to multiple folks that are in the room that are going to determine whether you get to the next level.
I do that sometimes. Like when I get called out on this so much when I do a speech and I'll say, we grew or we did this. And I was like doing a panel for something and one of the jury members of this award, they were like, who's we? Like, it's just you in the room. You need to say I. And I was like, I apologize. I didn't realize, but you're so right. How do we, for those working in those spaces that are like, okay, this is really resonating. I definitely, need to showcase my work more and get more ahead of the decision makers. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah. And obviously you've had so much success. I've just been, I've read your book. I think that was a New York Times bestseller, right? Or almost.
No, it wasn't, but
I feel like in my mind, in my heart, the way I tell everybody about your book, I'm like, you need to read this book. I actually have extra copies of it. And I literally hand it to people. Or if I don't have one, I'm like, you need to buy this book. It's great. Yeah.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
We, New York Times bestsellers are based on only sales in the States.
Oh,
so
okay.
if it's worldwide sales, it doesn't quite count.
Okay.
But in my heart, we're a New York Times bestseller.
Well, I think that when what you just asked me, like the I and how do we pivot, but I think I would have never noted that about you. And I think that in reading what you write and hearing what you say, I think that it's very clear that a lot of your success has because of your vision and what you've done. And obviously you've had collective inputs from people outside, probably advising, but I think that you've done a really good job, like marketing, like what you do. But, I think it is shifting your mindset from an I to we is uncomfortable when you first start. Because you feel like, am I being, there's these negative connotations to it where it's like, I don't want to seem arrogant. Yeah. I don't want to seem overly confident. I want to have humility. And so you feel like as soon as you shift from the we to the I, am I reducing that humility of myself? Or am I doing a disservice to the team that collectively worked on the goal? So I think the way that I've been able to feel comfortable, because obviously being South Asian and then now having to kind of work in corporate America for, almost 20 years, I've had to become comfortable with saying, here's the work that I did to drive this specific impact. And this is how the team contributed to this goal. But it's really being able to tell that story in a way that your direct impact is known, but that you're still able to involve the team in terms of how they help contribute, if that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Do you mind giving like an example of like how someone might say if they were just speaking on the team versus like if you were like critiquing one of your juniors to be like, no, you need to put yourself front and center as well?
Yeah. I think as the leader of the team, you're often setting like the vision and the macro picture and you're setting the goals for the team. So then you have your individual contributors figuring out, okay, what is their role to help the team achieve those goals? So a time is I had launched a program, which was a market special, like market POC, we called it. So basically we covered advertising across our publisher ecosystem, which means that we covered media and entertainment, news and publishing, commerce, auto, healthcare. So each industry, we did not have a specific like technical solutions engineer that was focused on the sector, focused on how they were performing according to peers and really building that domain expertise or industry expertise. And so I built out a program to say, here's what the need is. And I think we need to kind of structure it. And so I had individuals kind of managing those sectors. So collectively, as the leader, I would look at the macro view. So I would say, okay, across the publisher ecosystem, here's the revenue or the opportunity we've exposed because of peer competitive analysis. And then the individuals might have been, say, media and entertainment saw the largest opportunity. Maybe it was because that individual might have had access to more data or figured out a smarter way or figured out a more efficient way to say, here's where the gap is. And so I wanted to make sure that that individual also got the exposure to say, here's the opportunity I found within this market that was a gap. And here's where I think we can really help with these, X number of partners to help them increase their pricing strategy or reduce their pricing strategy. So they were also getting the benefit of the additional revenue.
That is really helpful, I think. Thank you for sharing an example, because it really highlights like you can share your impact and not feel like you're the things that you've spoken about. Do you find that there are things that you like recommend to your teams that over the years when you have like especially young women say, I want to work my way up, but I just don't even know where to begin. I don't even know what skill sets am I meant to have? Am I meant to change? Am I meant to be myself? Like, how do you even navigate the more softer side of it?
Yeah, I think that that's a really good question. And I think that even now in my life, I'm trying to figure out, what's the next thing. And I really believe in we are constantly evolving. I'm a curious person. I think so are you. I think I enjoy learning and I enjoy building new skills. I enjoy learning from others. Like, I think for young women that are still trying to figure out, like, what should I do? I don't really know my strength. I'm still trying to figure it out. Like, there's so many different career opportunities, right? So I think a few data points that I've always looked at when I've been thinking about my next, pivot is, one is, what fulfills me? Like, what's my purpose? Like, what do I feel the most passionate about? So I think just kind of having a sense of knowing what excites you, what industry excites you, and really asking yourself those questions. The second thing is obviously location. So I think that's a factor. And like, okay, is this the right opportunity for me? Because return to office is a thing. So if you're working for a corporation, not a startup, I don't know how flexible startups are, but I know in big tech, you have to basically be in the office again. So I would say location is an important factor. Compensation obviously is an important factor. Is like, there's careers that could be a little bit longer tenure before you see a big paycheck. And then there's careers that you might see that bigger paycheck earlier on, but there might be more risk or more indefinite timeline for those roles. So really figuring out, like, what is the compensation that you feel comfortable with based on where you're living and what you like to do. And so really looking at those 3 data points, I would then try to figure out, like, okay, what are the companies that are available, or what are the types of roles that I'm looking for? I don't know if that helps.
That really does help. And I wanted to ask another question that comes up a lot. One of our community members said, I feel this pressure to start a business because when I go online, that's what everyone says is the way to make wealth. You're like smiling.
Well, I just feel like everybody now, and I'm always like surprised and I'm impressed as well, but I'm also a little like surprised at the number of people when I go on social media or I go on LinkedIn and I look at their profiles, they have founder.
Yeah.
And I think that we've somehow lost the concept of, like, start a business, understand the problem that you're trying to solve. So like, there's businesses being started like all the time, right? So sometimes I feel like I read some profiles and I'm like, what is the problem statement? Is this a real world problem statement? And so like, I just feel like people are throwing out these founder titles, but not really either having a real business that has a real business model or a profitable model or some type of operating model. Like, I don't know if it's being thrown around too loosely.
I think it is. I think it definitely is. And then it's causing a lot of anxiety, and it's causing a lot of grass is greener syndrome, where a lot of like the young women that listen, they go, well, should I get out of my 9-to-5 job? Is it not something that I should be doing? And as someone that's had a parent that's been a business owner, but then someone that's chosen to build your wealth through a corporate career, like, do you have any words of wisdom?
Of like starting a company versus like working for someone?
That, that it's still possible to build wealth in a 9-to-5 job.
I'm so happy that you asked that, because I think that oftentimes, and people still say this to me, they're like, if you want to 10x your wealth, you have to start your own company and work for yourself. And I think that is definitely an approach, but it's really tough to have, a unicorn company or to have 100 million valuation. It's tough. I think if you're going to go the founder route, I think it's really, again, just like a portion of like, do what you love, but at the same time, know the problem statement or what you're solving for to kind of drive that ambition and intention so that you can see the reward. But I think that if you are like, that's daunting, that's like overwhelming, it's a lot of work to start your own company, I rather just work for somebody else because I like to be directed a little bit, or I like to be coached, or I like to have the mental stability that I have this bigger company looking out for me and it's not all on me. And I think that's where I think corporate's a good place. And I do think that there is a lot of monetary potential, like working for someone else. Like, I think that there's an old school thought of like, oh, you're never going to make that much money when you work for someone else. But I think if you work hard and you do the right thing and you are, a good team player, I think you can be making a good amount of money working for someone else as well.
I also think
9-to-5s, I don't think really exist, right? Like, no one's really working a 9-to-5.
What are you working when you were at Google? Like 7 to 12?
I'm trying to think, like, I'm like always like 9-to-5. And like, if I like, I it's really tough. Like, I don't know how to do that. I don't think I've ever been that person. So I'm probably not like the best advice person here for time boundaries, but I think because of access to information, email, contact, global time zones, like you are kind of working at different hours of the day. You might still be working a 40 or 50 or 60 hour work week, but it might not be as structured as a 9 to 5.
Do you listen to podcasts? There's one by Emma Greed on Diary of a CEO. Have you seen that episode?
No,
it's
I
very
haven't.
Niche, but she is the co-founder of Skims and founder of Good American, like with the Kardashians. She's like the business person behind these like celebrity brands. And she said that, work-life balance, you can have it, but then you can't expect like incredible salaries or incredible work opportunities. And if you are someone that works very hard, you often then do see a little bit more of a reward. So it kind of seems like that's part of your journey, at least. When people can worry about salaries, I don't think a lot of people outside of the sort of FANG bubble realize how far salaries can go in these like large tech companies. Like, what could someone expect in very general terms to be making?
Oh, this is a good question. Okay, so I want to say, I think most of this information is public in big tech. I think big tech is kind of what people, and finance might still be very much this way in terms of how people are getting compensated, but because of the way compensation structures work or how people get paid, it's a salary, a bonus, and equity. So because FANG and stuff have been doing so well from an equity standpoint, that generally has had a good return, right? Especially if you're holding on to it for the long run. I would say, the potential is it's so broad. It could be anywhere from like 100 and some thousand to millions based on your role and your tenure and your expertise. Yeah.
I really appreciate that answer because I think there's so many people that don't realize, it's not that every single person makes a salary, but you can make millions of dollars working in a 9 to 5 job that is not 9 to 5, but you don't have to start a company to build wealth. And if you're putting your money aside, like you're earning this much and you're investing a lot of it, like eventually you do get to a time where you work optional and you're working because you enjoy it and not because it's the only source of income. Did you find that it was important for you to have that financial freedom before you moved on to the next chapter of your career?
Yeah. I think that for me, it's interesting because it's kind of going back to how we started. So like, being Gujarati, being in a family that was like, use your dollar wisely, like, do you really need that? Or do you want to save it? And like the saving kind of mentality. When I was looking at jobs out of college, I remember getting an offer from like an investment bank to do a sales and trading role that was like twice as high as the salary that I was getting at NBC. It was like I think it was at that time, like it was like $100,000 offer.
Oh, wow. That's like,
it was a big offer. Right. And I remember like sitting there and saying, okay, I have the sales and trading offer. And then I have this offer, and these media production companies, and they're a lot less. But I think when I sat with, it's always a family decision when you're young, right? So it's like the family's in this room and you're like, okay, what am I doing? Like, why, career is such a big thing, right? Career and merit, I guess. Yes. Like I'm still like haven't figured that out. I think we need more family meetings on that. But like kind of career was like we're all sitting, and then I think my family, my dad, my sisters, my mom, they were like, do what you love. Like, what are you going to enjoy? And my mom would always say that, do what you're going to enjoy doing. And so she's like, don't chase the paycheck, like do what you enjoy doing, which is crazy from like a family that's like save, right? Yeah. You're like probably like make money fast, And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to turn down this really big paycheck and it's probably going to take me like, years to kind of even get to that salary, but I'm going to work where I think I'm going to have the most fulfillment. And that's where I took the media and entertainment job at NBC Universal, I'm sure they pay differently now. But I'm saying I was like, I will work for free. Like, I'm so excited to do this job. And then when I switched, 5 years later to Google, again, I remember getting the offer from Google. And even though I had said I manifested and I wanted to work there, I was still enjoying NBC. And I was like, this is a great job. And I said no. I said no twice to Google. And they came back the third time with more money. now I'm like 5 years later, I'm like, maybe New York is a little bit more expensive.
Yeah.
So I shifted, but it still wasn't, I still was not at where I was for that first job offer I got in sales and trading, which is insane, right? And it took me a while to get to that, even that base. And then I remember at Google, then I as soon as I got there, I think they were like, wow, you were underpaid. So that's tech, I guess, for you. And so they were like, okay, we're going to make you at market value for the tech industry. And then I think then incrementally, I think the compensation or the reward of tech, I was growing with the industry. So I was starting to see like, oh, you can make a lot of money working for someone else, or you can make not a lot of money because it's relative, but you can do what you can do. You can still have a nice paycheck and not feel this, this need to like have to be doing like working in sales and trading like you used to, or having to start your own company or buy a hotel or motel or whatever that looks like,
That was a very good the answer, that last one.
Yeah.
Buy a hotel or motel.
I was always like impressed by how much money they make. Like the hospitality industry, I'm like, okay, I just never,
It's incredible.
It's incredible.
I want to keep chatting and going on, but I am mindful of your time. And before we wrap up, I have one final question for you. For someone that's listening and going, I love this. This is so incredible. Like, I feel inspired to like turn up to work and, give my career more of a refresh. Do you have a favorite book or a podcast or just something that has helped you that you refer to as a good resource for like that sort of softer career development skills?
I've been reading The Power of Now to kind of ground myself on like kind of thinking forward and thinking about what do I want to do now and what are some of the things that I want to see in my life for the next decade or so. So I think that book is really good. And then the other thing I highly recommend, and this is not necessarily a book, but I think working with a career coach or executive coach, which is different than a therapist. Sometimes I think it blurs, but I think having somebody else that's a third party guide you or think through your career journey with you is really an invaluable asset. So I've been working with an executive coach for the last few years, and I feel that those exercises have helped me prioritize my intention to help streamline some of my aspirations, because I think our aspirations can get ahead of us sometimes. Mm-hmm. So really being able to have that person to brainstorm and kind of filter them down, and then also come up with a plan so that you're intentional in the search of a career or a job or whatever that looks like for you, so that you know how to market your LinkedIn profile and you know how to scope your resume. So I think I would recommend also working with somebody.
That is actually, I've never heard that before. And I think that's so valuable. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for letting me be here. This is so fun.
We're going to have you back sometime.
Oh my God, this was so fun. I always enjoy talking to you. And I think you're the reason why I feel less guilty about buying a nice purse, because I think you told me like a Birkin, which I still can't get, but I remember that you're like, you should not feel bad about getting, items that appreciate just as quick as some like positions I think you had told me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So thank you for all your advice.
I'm glad to help.
Yeah.
Thank you
so much.
Thanks for coming on. Fun.